Good morning. PT on Ice Daily Show. How are you? I am Dr. Lindsay Huey, one of our lead faculty for extremity management, coming to you on a clinical Tuesday. And today we're going to chat about what's the hype with hypertrophy. But before we dive into that, this clinical Tuesday, I want to tell you about some courses that Mark Gallant and I have coming up. So August 6th, 7th, I will be in Tempe, Arizona with Megan Daly. We still have some spots left, so if you want to experience some desert heat, come join us. And then August 20th and 21st, I'll be in Baton Rouge with Melissa Reed, and there are still maybe a couple spots left. But if you can't get into that course and you're finding that it is sold out, we will be back in Louisiana again, in Houma, Louisiana. I hope I pronounced Houma correctly, October 14th and 15th. So you can join Mark then. In addition, in between there will be a September course in California, September 10th, 11th out of National City. And then we'll be in California again, October 1st and 2nd, Semi Valley area. So we're doubling up on a couple states. So there's lots of opportunities to jump in. And then in November, we have courses in Windsor, Colorado, Iowa, and then Asheville, North Carolina. So check us out on ptonice.com. So what's the hype with hypertrophy? Let's chat. The literature keeps coming out with different intensities, different rep schemes, and parameters surrounding hypertrophy. So really, what hype do we need to pay attention to for our patients and for ourselves as fitness enthusiasts? Well, you want to pay attention to anything Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, PhD, associate professor out of Bronx, New York at Lehman College. He is the leader in the hypertrophy space. You type in hypertrophy, you're going to see his name alongside the literature. His book, Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy, is a go-to resource as well if you want to learn more about this space. But today I want to give you what we know as all-encompassing evidence and kind of where we're at currently. But before I do that, let's all just take an honest moment. Some of us think a lot about hypertrophy and gobble up the evidence regarding it. And some of us don't really think about it at all in our clinical and personal health practices. But for those that do think about it and are in this space, we generally accept the postulated theory that heavy load training optimizes increase in muscle strength, moderate load training optimizes increase in muscle hypertrophy, and low load training optimizes increases in local muscular endurance. So we were taught in PT school or in our undergrads that a particular set of reps and sets with a specific frequency and a specific rest always achieve targeted tissue domains, right? Strength being on that lower end and power, hypertrophy, endurance being on that higher rep, lower intensity end, and it being kind of this continuum. But it's simpler when it comes to hypertrophy. Before I talk about that simplicity piece, I just want to review what hypertrophy is and what we know the literature says about hypertrophy in its current state. So hypertrophy really is tissue adaptation. It's not just about getting jacked and increasing muscle cross-sectional area. It's also about changing a tissue health state. It is helping tissues respond to metabolic stress and mechanical tension. At an appropriate stimulus that's working towards fatigue, it incites metabolites into the muscle and it helps facilitate protein synthesis. This results in a host of effects such as acute metabolic changes, hormonal and neural changes, and even cardiovascular changes in that tissue. We're usually targeting a specific tissue when we think about going after hypertrophy, right? The bicep curl to get jacked in our biceps or our glutes. That's another famous area that we want to grow. So here's a review of the top aspects that we want on board when we think about hypertrophy, or at least what the literature tells us needs to be a part of our domains when achieving hypertrophy, and that is our loading dose. So typically it's in that moderate repetition scheme, anywhere from 8 to 12, with a 60 to 80% intensity, think moderate load for hypertrophy gains. Your overall volume will be about 10 to 20 sets in a week. So that's that sweet spot volume. It can be up to 30 sets in lagging muscle tissue, but usually that 10 to 20 hits. So if we think about a 3 sets of 10 at a 70% intensity, we're looking at doing that 3 to 4 times a week to hit that 10 to 20 set sweet spot of overall volume. What we need to consider with the loading dose, it's not just simply reps and sets and overall volume, it actually is also about rest. When we think about multi-joint training, you need at least 2 minutes. When we think about single joint or machine-based training, 60 to 90 seconds is that sweet spot rest for hypertrophy. And more on why that is in a bit. Range of motion is our second thing that needs to be considered in hypertrophy. And what we see consistently in the literature is that if you have increased range of motion on board, you'll see increased muscle growth. It doesn't mean that you can't still see some hypertrophy gains in a reduced range, especially when you're targeting certain tissues. Think partial squat and glutes. You can still see some gains there. But overall, when we look at systematic review level evidence, specifically from Brad Schoenfeld in 2020, we see out of the Sage Open Medicine Journal that with increased range of motion comes increased muscle growth. Something to consider, though, is that our magnitude of load is often a little less when we're going through a greater range of motion, right? A reduced range allows for a little bit bigger load. Just recently in 2022, we saw evidence come out about what's better, tricep down at side or tricep training overhead, which elicits greater cross-sectional area in the tricep. And what was found out of the European Journal of Sports Medicine is that greater hypertrophy gains are in that overhead position, yet the load is much less than being at your side. Fatigue is that other piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about hypertrophy. I mentioned that 2-minute rest being that sweet spot in order to load up appropriately and get hypertrophy. What's so important to note about that is that if you don't rest that full 2 minutes and you go in at that next set too early, you won't be able to have enough effort on board. You won't be able to elicit the same effort. The other thing is if you rest too long, right? If you rest 3 to 4 minutes in between your sets, then your effort will be less, right? Because you've had a longer break, the rep set will feel easier. So that 2-minute is that sweet spot for hypertrophy when we think multi-segmental joint. Single joint focus and machine-based, like I said, can be around 60 to 90-second rest. But consider the rest is important because we want to bring on fatigue in our subsequent sets. That last set, when you're going after hypertrophy, needs to be almost fatiguing, only having 1 to 2 sets left in reserve. Why? Why does that matter? Well, fatigue brings on higher levels of metabolic stress and recruitment. It really helps recruit that high threshold motor unit. So following that rest scheme to a T is important. But not only do we want to work with working towards fatigue, we also want to work with high effort on board. That's the purpose of the time domain, because we want high effort at each set that we do, and especially as we work towards that last set. And of course, high effort, when we think clinically or even personally, will look different, right? Depending on stages of irritability, if we compare an untrained versus a trained human, single joint versus multi-joint, that's going to affect our effort as well. We will bring, so far, right, what we have is we will have an appropriate loading dose, full range of motion, working to fatigue, and then having effort on board throughout. That last piece is that mind-body connection and focus. We see consistently in the literature increased EMG activity, when we're focusing on the targeted muscle at hand. So we're actually thinking about, let's think bicep curl again, think about our bicep, let's think squat, let's think about our glutes specifically growing. We see that there's increased muscle activity here when you not only bring high effort consistently, but you bring focus on the task and the muscle at hand. So again, one more time from the top, what we know and what the literature tells us, we need an appropriate load with a specific set, reps, and frequency. We need full range of motion. We need an appropriate sweet spot rest that considers fatigue as a desired factor, right? Not too much rest and then not enough rest, because we want to bring that full effort on board, that full send effort, and then that last bit, the focus. So this is still a hefty list. Um, in its summation format. And I told you I was going to make hypertrophy more simple. I promised it, especially when we're thinking about clinically treating painful irritable tissues. So here's the simplistic part, team. Hypertrophy comes along for the ride. It occurs throughout the rep continuum. If we demand high effort, we will see hypertrophy change in tissue, no matter the human or intensity. So we'll see it at that 1 to 5 rep scheme, high intensity. We'll see it at that 8 to 12 rep scheme, moderate intensity, and we'll see it over here in that lower intensity, high rep place. Increased muscle growth occurs along varied rep schemes at intensities of 30 to 80% when high effort is on board. We can get hypertrophy not just at that 3 sets of 10, 70% 1 rep max with a 2-minute rest. We can also get it at 15 reps and 4 sets at like a 40% intensity. And we can even get it when we're working that 5x5 at 85% 1 rep max. This rep continuum allows us to go after hypertrophy no matter the state of tissue irritability of our humans. This is the key part, team. We can challenge our humans' tissues alongside of irritability, as long as we demand high effort and we manipulate our sets, reps, and our rest accordingly. People are coming to us in pain and with unhealthy tissues. They are lacking nutrients and overall stress tolerance. What do we ultimately want for our humans that are coming to us with high irritability tissues and in pain? We want their tissues to be more stress tolerant. We want a hypertrophic stimulus, and we will change muscle tissue by meeting the patient where they are, by respecting irritability. So let's think about this. Someone with high irritability, we can work at a higher rep scheme, lower intensity. So we're on this part of the rep continuum, and vice versa. Low irritability, right? We can work on this higher intensity spectrum a bit more quickly, right? Lower reps, higher intensity. So we can be efficient and effective no matter where the patient lies, no matter where their irritability is. By manipulating intensity and reps, we gain access to changing a patient's tissue health. And then ultimately what we're here for, right? Changing their life, changing their quality of life and their ability to do what's important to them. By considering the rep continuum and intensity and effort, we can challenge tissues no matter where they are in irritability. I challenge us to think about hypertrophy a bit more simply, whether you thought about it ever before in your life or where you constantly think about it in your fitness journey and for your patients. Let's demand high effort, no matter the irritability, and we can manipulate our intensity, our reps, our sets to do so. Team, at ICE, we call this the rehab dose, right? It falls anywhere from 8 to 20 reps, 3 to 4 sets at an intensity of 30 to 80%. You'll rest about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. We can be both effective and efficient at changing all of our humans' tissue health by thinking about hypertrophy a bit more simply and thinking about it more like a continuum of care where the hypertrophy is riding constant. To learn a little bit more about the rehab dose and how we use it for extremity joints, please join us Check us out on ptoниce.com. Have a happy, happy Tuesday, everyone.